Joseph Spence was a historian, literary scholar and anecdotist, most famous for his collection of anecdotes that are an invaluable resource for historians of 18th-century English literature. Early life. Spence was born on 28 April 1699, at King's Clear, Hampshire, the son of Joseph and Mirabella. In 1709, Spence attended school in Mortimer, near his birthplace, and later attended Eton College and then Winchester College. Spence matriculated to Magdalen Hall, Oxford on the 11th of April 1717, but did not go up until admitted as scholar, a probationary fellow at New College on the 22nd of April 1720. On the 30th of April 1722, he received a full fellowship, taking his Bachelor of Arts degree on the 9th of March 1724 and Master of Arts on the 2nd of November 1727. Spence was ordained in the Oxford diocese on the 5th of June 1726. Early literary friends of Spence included fellow Wycomists Robert Lowe, Christopher Pitt, and Edward Young. Spence wrote an essay on Alexander Pope's translation of Homer's Odyssey in 1726, which gave rise to a friendship between Spence and Pope. In 1727, Pope published his comments on the second part of Spence's essay. Later life. Spence was elected as the Oxford Professor of Poetry on the 11th of July 1728, holding the post for maximum term allowed. In the same month he was given the new college living of Birchanger, Essex, but continued to live in Oxford when not travelling abroad. Recommended by Alexander Pope, Spence became a travelling companion of Charles Sackville, 6th Earl of Dorset and 1st Earl of Middlesex, on her tour lasting from December 1730 to July 1733. In 1731, while Spence was abroad, his account of Stephen Duck was published. On his return to Oxford he lectured and made mundane contributions to poetry collections marking royal weddings, births, and deaths. In 1736 he published an account of Lord Buckhurst and an edition of Gorboduus. Spence was a companion to John Morley Trevor in his tour of the Netherlands, Flanders, and France between May 1737 and February 1738, and between September 1739 and November 1741 travelled in Italy with Henry Pelham Clinton, the Earl of Lincoln. Lord Lincoln then provided the scholar with appointments and incomes that ensured his financial security. While touring, Spence frequently wrote letters to his mother, which he later edited for publication but never published. On the 4th of June 1742 Spence was appointed Regius Professor of Modern History and Exchange Birchanger for Great Horwood, Buckinghamshire, which he visited each year and distributed charity. Around 1742, he gave up his fellowship at New College and settled with his mother in London and often visited Alexander Pope. After much work, Spence published Polymetis as an illustrated folio in February 1747. He had first thought of such a work during his first visit to Italy and used much of the material he had collected there, intending to demonstrate the relationship between the works of ancient artists and of Roman poets. The work was critiqued by Gotthold Ephraim Lessing in his 1766 work, Laocoon, which subsequently adversely affected its standing. In 1748, Lord Lincoln gave Spence the use of a house he owned at Byfleet, Surrey, which Spence and his mother moved into, having designed Birchange's garden along the lines of Pope's garden in Twickenham, and planting extensively at Great Horwood, as well as designing gardens and making notes for Friends London. Spence further explored his interest in landscape gardening at Byfleet, developing the 30-acre estate as a firm or NAA, though making extensive notes and translating Jean Denis Attiat's account of the Emperor of China's gardens. Spence left his gardening treatise, Tempe, unfinished. His translation of Attiat was published in 1752 under the pen name of Sir Harry Beaumont, which he also used for Crito, published in 1752, and Moralities, published in 1753. In 1752–3 Spence published accounts of Robert Hill and Thomas Blacklock, and promoted a subscription edition of Blacklock's poems. In 1758, Spence travelled with Robert Dodsley to visit Blacklock in Scotland, and en route, visited William Shenstone at the Leashouse. Spence had his work parallel in the manner of Plutarch printed at Horace Walpole's Strawberry Hill Press in 1758, to raise money for Hill. In 1753 Spence provided notes for an edition of Virgil written by Joseph Warton, and in 1768 edited the Remarks on Virgil by Edward Holdsworth, the authors being friends and old Wycomists. Spence was installed as a prebendary of Durham Cathedral on the 24th of May 1754, a posting on the generosity of the Bishop of Durham, Richard Trevor. Spence continued to live at Byfleet and spent more than the minimum time required for his prebendal duties of 3 weeks' residence at Durham. In Durham, he not only began to improve the garden of his prebendal estate, but also those of his neighbours the Bishop and the Earl of Darlington. Henry Vane, sometimes spending weeks at a time travelling to landscaped gardens where his advice had been sought. Spence suffered a mild stroke during his annual journey north in June 1766, and made his will at Sedgefield, Durham, on the 4th of August 1766. On the 24th of March 1767, Spence sold the copyrights, including those on his unpublished works, to James Dodsley for £100. His executors, however, blocked publication of the anecdotes. On the 20th of August 1768, Spence was found lying face down in the shallow ornamental waters of his garden at Byfleet, and was buried 4 days later at St. Mary's, Byfleet. Works. Spence's published works include an essay on Pope's Odyssey and Polymetus. Spence's unpublished works include his edition of Travelling Letters, notes for a gardening treatise, notes for a biographical history of English poetry, and his anecdotes, which include tales about Alexander Pope and other literary figures such as John Arbuthnot, Isaac Newton, and Stephen Duck.